What if I told you there's an engine that perfectly balances performance, reliability, and cost of ownership? Would you believe me? Well, in today's video, we're uncovering the secrets behind BMW's best engine ever, the legendary B58. So the B58 engine started being produced in 2015 and was equipped in many different models ranging from the M140i to the 240i to the 340i, the 440i, all the way up to the X3 and a bunch of other different vehicles. So the B58 is an inline-six engine equipped with a twin-scroll turbocharger. From the factory, the B58 engine produces anywhere from 320 horsepower all the way up to 380 horsepower stock. And as well, it produces anywhere from 332 to 369 foot-pounds of torque stock. And now BMW is notorious for undervaluing or underrating their horsepower and torque numbers. So the actual numbers from independent dyno tests that have been done actually supersede that all the way up to 400 horsepower at the crank. And especially when you factor in the 10 to 20% of drivetrain loss from the crankcase to the wheels itself, the BMW B58 engine actually produces upwards of 400 horsepower at the crank. But of course, BMW isn't going to tell you this, just like most of their vehicles. And so the B58 engine carries the torch forward, being an inline-six engine with a twin-scrolling turbocharger. Now, BMW is notorious for making some of the best inline-six engines ever, but what makes the B58 so much different is its modular design. And so what it means for an engine to be modular is most of the components can be cross-compatibly used across the board. Almost 40% of all of the engine components found in the B lineup can be cross-used with each other. So that means 40% of the components on the B48 can be also used on the B58 engine. And so what this means is BMW is able to make a mass amount of these parts and sell it to you, the consumer, at a cheaper price point. Oftentimes is what we see when car manufacturers don't follow this concept is that certain engine components end up being way more expensive than others. So you can see this notoriously in the N54 and N55 engine, where the previous gen N54, the fuel injectors sold for $2,000-$3,000 because the fuel injectors were such a trouble point in the vehicle. So for you, the consumer, having a modular engine means, hey, you can go out and buy all these different B48 engine parts and they fit perfectly on to the B58 engine. And I want you guys to keep in mind that the 330, 380 horsepower stock that this engine makes is nowhere near its potential. With a few breathing modifications such as intake, tune, exhaust, downpipes, and a few other little tweaks here and there, this engine can be safely brought up to 500 horsepower with minimal upgrades done. The B58 engine really is a tuner's dream engine because it's extremely reliable, which we'll get into later, but it also produces a ton of power while keeping the straight six setup and mitigating any issues that you could have with a twin turbo setup, because this engine is twin scrolling, not twin turbocharged. We're basically telling you that anybody who goes to the dealership and buys any of these 440i's, 340i's, etc., equipped with this engine can push 500 horsepower easily and not face any reliability issues. And there's plenty of people out there on YouTube or in the forums that have easily made 700 horsepower on stock internals. And now anybody wanting to put down a massive amount of power really has to look into the bottom end of their vehicle. And this is where the B58 shines. To further reinforce the bottom end, BMW actually equipped a crank girdle similar to the one in the 2JZ that ties the main bearing caps and the main body together to give more strength and make the whole bottom end more rigid and able to handle higher horsepower numbers. And so now the B58 engine was actually a collaboration project from BMW and Toyota, and it is hailed as the equivalent of the new and modernized 2JZ engine. So if you're familiar with the 2JZ engine, this was the engine located in the older model Supras. And now this collaboration is one that we never would have seen coming. Having the raw power and driving experience of a BMW, but having the reliability factor of Toyota basically meshes together to have the best engine ever created. And Toyota doesn't just stamp their approval on any engine. If they knew the B58 was going to throw issues, they would have never equipped this in the new Supra. And yes, that is right, the new A90 Supra is actually equipped with this same engine setup. And now, although this engine gets compared to the older 2JZ engine that released almost 20 years ago, there are actually a ton of key advantages that make this engine more powerful and also projected to be more reliable. From having a water to air intercooler located directly in the intake manifold, to the engine being set up to where oil squirts directly on the bottom of the pistons themselves to dissipate heat and lubricate the engine, this motor is projected to be BMW's peak collaboration of power and reliability, something that they've been trying to chase for decades. And now furthermore, the B58 engine is made out of an aluminum material, and that allows the B58 to create a ton of power while also being lighter weight, aiding BMW to keep that near 50-50 weight distribution on most of their models. So all of this being said, if you want to squeeze out the most power out of your engine as possible, and you want to tune this vehicle and do all sorts of upgrades to it and bring it up to that 600-700 horsepower number, you can do this. Rest assured that the bottom end will be able to handle those numbers. And so the B58 engine offers an extremely smooth and powerful experience all the way through the rev band. Even on a completely stock engine, this vehicle pulls you from a stop. So now this engine has a fuel cutoff limit of 7,200 RPMs, but the torque that's felt at the bottom end is buttery smooth and brings you up to speed in no time. I actually had the experience of riding in my buddy's 2017 BMW 440i M Sport package, and he had a few minor upgrades done to it, linked down below for that video, and this thing absolutely pulled into another dimension. The fact that we were able to accelerate from 0 to 120 miles an hour with minimal effort is absolutely bananas. And he wasn't even putting his foot down all the way. We're talking halfway on the pedal, and this thing genuinely makes you feel a pit in your stomach when you're pressing down on that accelerator pedal. And to further this experience, BMW actually equipped the B58 with the 8-speed ZF transmission that feels blessed. ZF has always been known for their sport-oriented transmissions, but more specifically, being equipped with the B58 gives you a buttery smooth experience and shifts that seem seamless. The ZF has a more aggressive shift that immediately bites down and is able to translate power onto the next gear seamlessly. Almost feels like a DCT. And so what that does for the driver is it allows you to come up to any speed you want, buttery smooth, and aided with the massive amount of low-end torque that this drivetrain offers, it is just an absolutely amazing experience. And now being able to have that level of performance with the forged crank and the beefy pistons that allow you to tune this thing all the way up, it really is the newest and most modernized version of the 2JZ engine. And yes, I know people said this about the N54 engine, but don't get it twisted. The B58 is worlds and leagues more reliable than the N54 ever could be. And now that brings us into our next topic. The topic that everyone wants to discuss is reliability. How is the reliability on the B58 engine? Well, let's go ahead and dive right into that. So just to preface, this engine was listed on Ward's top 10 engines of the world 4 times. And now even making it onto that list is hard to do once. And now that tells you something about the power and the experience behind it, but not necessarily the reliability, because again, the N54 engine was not so reliable and it actually made it onto the same list. And now overall, if you look into any of the BMW forums where owners are talking about their experience behind this vehicle, it's generally pretty positive. And now I've really only seen 2 negative remarks revolving around this engine. And the first one is going to be the PCV valve. So what the PCV valve does is it controls emissions from the crankcase by removing harmful vapors and transferring them to the intake manifold for combustion. And so the issue that people have been facing with their B58 engine is that the diaphragm for the little valve itself gives out, and it basically creates a smoke show. People start burning oil, they have this white and blue smoke coming out of their exhaust or shooting out of their engine bay, and it looks like your engine just exploded. But in reality, it's a little cheap part that can be easily replaced on your own. So in reality, it's not a big deal. People DIY this all the time and do it themselves, but it is a little bit of a headache. So overall, I wouldn't even say that that makes the engine unreliable. Number 2 is the fuel injectors. Now this isn't a common issue. This is basically on any of BMW's turbocharged engines, I've seen this from the N54 all the way up, the fuel injectors typically tend to have issues relating to carbon buildup that affect how they spray and affects the combustion process all in all. Now again, this isn't a huge issue because if you have a B58 engine, it's probably still under warranty and you can get this swapped out for free. I would say this isn't even an issue that should detract you from getting this drivetrain setup. I mean, BMWs have had this issue all the way from the N54. It's a dime a dozen. It's not every single model, but it's just something to look out for. Overall, the B58 has actually had very positive reviews reliability wise. If you just take care of what needs to be done, such as oil changes, transmission fluid changes, coolant changes, replacing, leaky oil seals, things of that nature, you typically won't have an issue. Now, there is one massive potential trouble area, and that really stems from the rear of the engine. So BMW placed the timing chain and the oil pump chain of this engine in the very rear. So that means if any of those components need to be serviced, you have to pull out the entire engine. And now that raises eyebrows to me because anything timing chain or oil pump related, doing the maintenance on this is going to be worlds harder. Now, the B58 engine is too new for us to see if this is going to become a long-term issue. So that's why I would let this be a red flag to you, but I wouldn't let it be a detractor necessarily. So now BMW says they did this to mitigate harmonic imbalances that could affect the engine at higher RPMs and allows the engine to just live a longer life, but we'll see how that pans out over time. And so overall, in the scope of reliability, BMW hit it right so far. Again, this engine is too new for us to say definitively if it is the most reliable / powerful engine BMW has made to date, but it does many things right. The modular setup allows you, the driver, to have access to parts at a drastically lower price point. It creates a ton of power stock, has an absolutely large aftermarket that makes this engine setup a tuner's dream for chasing 3, 4, 5, 6, even 700 horsepower and not having to sweat over reliability. So overall, I would say the B58 engine is BMW's best engine to date in terms of reliability, performance, and tunability. But let me know what you think. I would love to hear your experience with this engine setup. Do you prefer the N lineup of the N54, N55, or do you love the B48, B58 engine? I want to hear your experiences. Have you owned one? Have you thought about buying one? Does your friend own one? What do you think? Please leave it down below in the comments, and we'll catch y'all in the next video. Peace out.